Welcome to history.
Okay, buckle up, buttercups. We are about to go deep, and I mean deep, on a philosophical brainbuster that might just leave you questioning, well, everything.
Let me guess. We're talking about a certain mustache-twirling German philosopher.
Bingo. We're diving headfirst into the wild world of Friedrich Nietzsche and that infamous quote,
God is dead.
Right.
Now, before anyone panics,
Yeah.
we're not talking about like a literal Thanos-snapped deity here.
No, definitely not. Nietzsche was using incredibly powerful imagery, to be sure.
Right.
But he was really trying to get at a shift in belief, a transformation in the very fabric of Western thought.
Right. It's more like, imagine, I don't know, the bedrock of society suddenly cracking.
Okay.
That's the kind of earthquake Nietzsche was talking about.
Yeah, I like that.
But to understand what he meant, we got to rewind a bit, go back in time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nietzsche was writing in the late 19th century, and this is a time when Christianity's influence on society was already sort of on the decline, right?
Okay.
Think about the impact of the Enlightenment. The rise of reason, scientific inquiry, people questioning traditional authority.
Yeah, it's like that light bulb moment when you realize, hey, maybe there's more to the story than we were always told.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for centuries, the church's explanations of the world, they reigned supreme, right?
Sure.
But with the Enlightenment, now you've got thinkers like Galileo, Newton offering scientific explanations for phenomena that were previously, attributed to God's will.
Right.
Galileo and the whole earth revolving around the sun thing.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about ruffling some feathers, right?
Exactly.
That's just one example of how these scientific discoveries were challenging the church's authority. And for some people, it chipped away at the very idea of God.
So picture this, right?
Yeah.
God is no longer this unquestioned answer to every big question.
Yeah.
That's huge. What fills that vacuum?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what worried Nietzsche, right? He saw the potential for immense freedom, but also immense danger. And the danger for him was nihilism, the belief that nothing ultimately matters, that life has no inherent purpose.
So if God is dead, if that whole foundation crumbles, what do we build our lives on?
What's the point?
Right.
It's like stepping off a cliff, right?
Yeah.
No more pre-written script.
Right.
No divine plan.
Yeah.
Does that freedom become terrifying instead of liberating?
That is exactly it.
Yeah.
That is the crux of Nietzsche's worry.
Okay.
He even called it the abyss, right? This feeling of groundlessness when you realize, there's no cosmic safety net. Right.
And we kind of see echoes of that in the 20th century, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
With, 2 world wars, totalitarian regimes. It's like humanity was desperately seeking something to believe in.
Right. To give them a sense of purpose.
To give them a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Even if it was messed up.
Even if it meant, embracing ideologies that turned out to be incredibly dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. And this is,
was he right? Was that
in a way, yes. It was a tragic example of Nietzsche's fears coming true, right? When you have this crumbling of traditional values and those old ways of finding meaning,
right,
they no longer suffice. It creates this vacuum, and that vacuum can be exploited, right?
Yeah,
and often with devastating consequences.
Yeah,
think about the rise of fascism, for example, right? It offered this sense of belonging, this sense of purpose,
right?
Even a twisted form of moral certainty. It's a stark reminder of the risks involved when people are unmoored from those traditional beliefs and they're searching for something, anything, to replace them.
So what's the alternative? Does he just leave us staring into the abyss?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
Not quite.
Okay.
He introduces this idea of what he calls the Ubermensch, the overman. It's about a new kind of human who embraces this freedom and the responsibility of creating their own values in a world without God.
Okay, so less Superman and more self-made meaning maker.
There you go, yeah.
Someone who looks at the abyss and says, challenge accepted.
Exactly. Yeah, they're not afraid to question everything, to forge their own path.
Okay.
To create art, to explore new frontiers of knowledge and experience. Right. Think about someone like Marie Curie, right? Pushing the boundaries of science, despite all of the societal restrictions she faced. Or artists like Picasso,
Right.
who completely redefined how we see the world through art.
Yeah.
They didn't let the death of God mean the death of meaning. They created their own. Reaching your full potential as a human being, but without any pre-written rule book.
Okay, so less about leaping tall buildings in a single bound and more about creating your own values, maybe, like becoming the author of your own life story.
Now you're getting it. The Ubermensch, they see the death of God not as a tragedy, but as this incredible opportunity to step up and create meaning from the ground up. They're not bound by the old rules or traditional morality.
That's both exhilarating and kind of terrifying, right? Like, it's freeing to think we could write our own rules, but also a huge responsibility.
Exactly. This isn't about superpowers. It's way deeper than that, right? It's about human potential, self-mastery.
Yeah.
And really the search for meaning, especially in a world where those old answers, they just don't work anymore. They don't cut it.
Definitely not.
So I think to really get started here, we got to set the stage right. Like Nietzsche, he wasn't writing in some kind of vacuum. The late 19th century, huge upheaval. You've got industrialization changing everything. All those traditional beliefs are kind of like getting challenged left and right.
Yeah, I mean, context is super important with Nietzsche. Like you said, he's living in what feels like a world that's, falling apart. And the Ubermensch is kind of his answer to that. It's like a way forward for humanity in the face of all that.
Yeah. And he wasn't afraid to challenge a few things himself.
Yeah, absolutely not.
One of the articles mentioned him as like a quote-unquote homeless spirit, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. That is such a good way to describe him. He was very critical of nationalism. He thought it was really limiting. In fact, he actually renounced his Prussian citizenship.
Wow.
Lived as stateless, which back then was a really radical move.
Wow. He really walked the walk, huh?
He did.
All right. So to even start to wrap our heads around this whole Ubermensch thing, we got to remember this backdrop, right? This world that's changing like crazy, where all these old, solid ideas are just dissolving.
Yeah.
But before we even go there, I think we should address the elephant in the room, especially because, a couple of the articles you sent touch on this.
Yeah.
The whole Nazi connection.
Yeah.
So it's easy to find people twisting his ideas into something pretty dark, pretty dangerous, honestly.
Right.
But how much of that is actually legit?
Yeah, so that's where it gets complicated, right? His legacy.
Yeah.
Because Nietzsche himself, he was really critical of anti-Semitism and just prejudice in general, judging people based on like group identity.
Yeah.
Totally against it.
Yeah.
And it was actually sadly his sister who got involved with the Nazis.
Wow.
They took his ideas, or at least some parts of them, and like ran with them in a direction he probably never would have.
It's too bad the association's stuck. It distorts what he was really saying.
It really does.
Which I think is a good way to transition into what the Ubermensch is not.
Yeah.
So from what I'm getting, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it's not about being some power-hungry dictator, right?
Well,
or some kind of Nietzschean Superman.
Exactly. Yeah. Big misunderstanding there. The Ubermensch is not about controlling others or grabbing external power. It's about mastering yourself.
Right.
It's this internal struggle to overcome your limitations, your own inner demons, really, to create your own values in a world where those old ones just don't apply anymore.
So it's more like a hero's journey, but inside yourself.
Yeah.
Pushing your own boundaries, not other people's.
Exactly. Like that potential we all have to become something more, to grow,
Yeah.
to overcome.
And this is where I think it gets really interesting, because this idea of self-overcoming, he ties it to, one of his most famous and honestly misunderstood concepts.
Yeah.
The death of God.
Right.
Yeah, again, really important to clarify here, because we're not talking about some literal death.
Right. No, not at all. What Nietzsche's grappling with here is that those traditional sources of meaning and morality, especially the Judeo-Christian God, they're losing their grip on society.
So it's more like God represents this whole way of seeing the world.
Right.
A framework. But that framework, for him, it's crumbling.
Exactly. And he saw this as both terrifying and liberating.
Oh, yeah, bad.
Terrifying because suddenly everything we thought we knew is in question. But liberating because now we can create our own values. We get to define meaning in a world without all those pre-programmed answers.
Wow. Okay, so we've established the Ubermensch. It's not about some power trip or some kind of master race. It's this internal struggle for self-mastery, for going beyond our limits and actually creating our own values, because those old ones, they just aren't relevant anymore.
Right.
And that brings us back to the Ubermensch as this potential we all have. It's not like some superhuman being. It's a way of being, right? A way of living.
Totally. And this is where that whole will to power thing comes in, which for Nietzsche, it wasn't about, bossing other people around. It was about this fundamental drive, the drive to grow, to overcome obstacles, to create. It's in all of us, every living thing.
So to bring it to 2024, it's less Darth Vader, more like, I don't know, an entrepreneur building a company from nothing, or an artist who's really pouring their heart into their work.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, that really captures it, that drive to create, to overcome, to become something more. That's the heart of it.
And which, if I'm understanding this right, it's not some finish line you cross. It's this constant push for growth. Always striving.
Absolutely. You got it. It's all about embracing the journey, not just like chasing some destination. It's not about the destination. It's about really like living the journey. And I think you hit on something important there, which is, reading these articles you sent, that journey, it can get pretty intense.
Yeah, for sure. Like that whole eternal recurrence thing always messes with my head a little bit. It's like you live your life again,
right,
and again and again. Every little thing, just on repeat forever.
That's the idea, yeah. Like a thought experiment, How do we really feel about our lives? Would you be cool with reliving every good thing, every bad thing, every mistake? And not just once, but forever?
I think, honestly, my first reaction is like, no thanks. There's some days I'd rather just forget about.
Right.
But for Nietzsche, that's something the Ubermensch would embrace, the whole thing.
Yeah, totally. They'd be able to look at everything, all the good, all the bad, and just say, like, yes, this is it. No hesitation. Amor fati, he called it. Love of fate.
So it's not just like toughing it out.
Yeah.
It's really loving it all. Even the messy stuff. That's kind of hardcore, but also kind of amazing. I don't know. It's a lot.
I think you nailed it. It's a lot. Because it forces us to find the meaning in everything, even the hard parts, not just the high points. Even the struggles, the failures, all those moments where we think like, oh, this is awful. They all become part of our story, They make it richer.
And that loops back to the self-overcoming thing, doesn't it? Because to even get close to that, to loving your fate, you got to confront all that stuff we usually avoid, all those limitations inside.
Yes. It's like radical self-acceptance, but not just giving up, right? It's about owning those flaws, those parts of us we don't love, because that's part of what makes us us. But then at the same time, we're pushing to be better, always growing.
It's interesting reading about Nietzsche's life because it really seems like he lived that way, pushing boundaries, trying new things. He wasn't all talk, he walked the walk.
Totally. Like the Ubermensch, for him, it wasn't just some idea in a book. It was a way of existing in the world, He really believed in questioning everything, living life on your own terms. That whole will to power wasn't some aggressive thing. It was about creation, about overcoming. And he lived that.
And that ties into that whole good European idea, right?
Yeah.
Rising above national borders.
Yeah.
Feeling connected to something bigger, which, again, he actually did. Ditching his citizenship, being a citizen of the world.
Exactly. Like imagine back then saying those artificial divisions, those ideologies, they don't matter. He wanted to celebrate different cultures, challenge his own perspective. He traveled, he wrote, he made choices, and they all pointed to this idea of like, be bigger, be a citizen of the world. He was a true cosmopolitan, way ahead of his time.
It's almost like he's saying, like, don't let anyone tell you who you are. You decide. You belong to something bigger than all that.
And that is such a powerful message even now, because the world, it can feel so divided sometimes. But he reminds us we get to choose. We can embrace our shared humanity, find meaning that goes way beyond any label anyone tries to put on us.
It's just sad that his ideas got so distorted.
Yeah.
That this message of like individual empowerment and becoming yourself got turned into something so oppressive.
It makes you wonder what he'd think, being associated with people who wanted to control everyone, make them fit in these narrow boxes. The irony is kind of crazy.
It is. But I guess that's why it's even more important to read him for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Really try to understand, find our own meaning in what he said.
For sure.
Which, actually, I think this is a good transition into something that trips people up when they first encounter Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Is it all just a little much?
Yeah.
Like, is the Ubermensch too much of an ideal? Is it even possible to live that way?
Totally a valid question. I mean, I think Nietzsche wrestled with that himself, honestly. Remember, he didn't think this was easy. Like, you just wake up one day and boom, you're an Ubermensch. It's a process, something you're always working towards, this journey of self-discovery, always growing.
It's easy to get, like, stuck in our heads with all this, all the philosophy. But you're right, it comes down to how we live. you know, day to day.
Exactly.
And you've really given us a lot to think about, I gotta say. Confronting our limitations, figuring out our values, really being present, like you said, for all of it.
Yeah. And I wonder, what would it look like, you know, if we actually tried to live with that same energy Nietzsche had, that self-overcoming, that joy in pushing yourself?
Totally. What would that even mean for us?
Yeah.
What limitations are we holding on to? What if we really owned our choices, even the ones we regret?
Yeah.
And actually said yes to all of it?
Big questions, right?
Huge. And I don't think there are any easy answers.
I don't think Nietzsche would want there to be, you know, his whole thing was making us think, question what we think is true, and become who we really are deep down.
Totally. And that journey, sometimes it's messy. Even Nietzsche, he wasn't immune to that, was he?
Nope. Being brilliant doesn't make you invincible.
One of the articles, it talked about how his life ended, really tragically, with a mental breakdown. Spent years unable to even work.
Yeah.
It's almost like all that intensity, that drive, maybe it took a toll, you know?
People have debated that for, I don't know, over 100 years. No one knows for sure.
Right.
But it does make you think, maybe it's a reminder. We got to push ourselves. Yeah, but we're only human. We have limits.
Right. It's finding that balance, isn't it? Pushing without breaking.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to grow without, like, falling apart.
Exactly. It's not about self-destruction. It's about self-discovery.
Well said.
But, and I think this is important to bring up, he also talks about the last man.
Right.
What's that all about?
Right.
The last man sounds a little less, I don't know.
Inspiring.
Yeah, a little less, little less ambitious.
Okay. Like settling for the participation trophy?
Right.
In the game of existence?
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah. The last man represents the kind of the opposite of the Ubermensch. They're content with comfort, with conformity.
Okay.
The easy answers.
Right.
They'd rather not grapple with these big, scary existential questions.
Right.
You know, they want to be told what to think, what to value, how to live.
So instead of staring into the abyss, they're like binge watching it away.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
Filling that God-shaped hole with like the latest season of whatever's trending.
That's a very 21st century way of putting it.
Yeah.
But you see the point. The last man isn't necessarily malicious.
They're passive.
Okay.
Right? They represent this kind of spiritual laziness.
Right.
That Nietzsche really feared would become all too common.
Okay.
In a world without God.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, though, because like looking around today, it's not all doom and gloom, right? Like we have plenty of people who don't subscribe to traditional religion, who are living ethical, meaningful lives, building strong communities.
Yeah.
Does that mean like did Nietzsche get it wrong? Did he underestimate our capacity for good? Right. Even without like a divine scorecard?
It's a question worth asking, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps he did underestimate our resilience as human beings, or perhaps what we're seeing is a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
You have the Ubermensch and the last man kind of coexisting, right?
Yeah, okay.
You have those who are actively questioning, creating, striving for something more.
Yeah. And those who are, you know, content with a more passive, comfortable existence.
Which kind of circles back to that idea of like personal responsibility.
Exactly.
That we were talking about before, right? Like we all have to choose, consciously or not, like which path we're going to walk.
Absolutely. We're constantly making choices.
Yeah.
Even if we're not aware of it, right?
Right.
God is dead, Nietzsche declared.
Right.
But he also gave us the tools in a way to forge a new path forward.
Okay.
He challenged us to look within, to confront the abyss, and to create our own meaning.
Yeah.
It's a daunting task,
right?
But potentially a liberating one as well.
So for anyone listening who's ever felt that like
existential tremor, you know,
Yeah.
who's looked up at a silent sky and wondered, what now?
Yeah, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Where do I go from here?
Nietzsche offers, well, I don't know if it's a comforting answer,
Right.
but it's an answer.
It's a powerful answer.
It's an answer. You decide.
You decide.
You create. You become. And maybe none of us are ever fully like Ubermensch or last man.
Right. We're all on that spectrum somewhere.
But the choice, the struggle itself, that's where
the meaning is.
To find ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As Nietzsche reminds us, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Which leads us to another label that seems to get stuck to Nietzsche like a bad habit: nihilist. But our sources suggest that's not the whole story.
Not even close. And to really unpack Nietzsche's complex relationship with nihilism, we have to get into his concept of morality, specifically his distinction between two types: master morality and slave morality.
Okay, master morality versus slave morality. Honestly, those sound kind of loaded, but I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
It's like this. Imagine a pack of wolves, not the Disney-fied version, but like the real deal, nature's apex predators. Master morality, that's your alpha wolf.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So master morality is about strength, ambition, that drive to be at the top of the food chain.
You got it. It's about creating your own values, forging your own path, not because someone told you to, but because it's in your very nature. It's about striving for greatness, for the sake of greatness itself.
Okay, so like full on live your best life, but without the Instagram filters. What about slave morality then? Where does that fit into the wolf pack?
Slave morality, that's the wolf who resents the alpha, who feels threatened by strength and ambition. Think about it. They value humility, compassion, even pity.
So are you saying those are bad things? Because like compassion seems pretty important for a functioning society, right?
Oh, absolutely. Nietzsche isn't saying those qualities are inherently bad. It's more about the motivation behind them. With slave morality, there's often this element of resentment, this desire to pull others down to your level rather than striving for something greater.
Ah, okay. So it's less about the qualities themselves and more about the underlying, I don't know, the vibe.
Exactly. It's like, are you celebrating another person's success, or are you secretly hoping they trip on their way to the top? Nietzsche was concerned that slave morality, with its focus on comfort and conformity, could stifle creativity and hold back those who dared to be different.
Which reminds me, we were talking about Christianity earlier. Where does that fit into this whole master versus slave morality thing?
That's a big one, and it's where Nietzsche gets a bit controversial. He saw Christianity, at least in the way it had evolved by his time, as the embodiment of slave morality.
Whoa, really? How so?
Well, he argued that Christianity's emphasis on humility, self-sacrifice, and turning the other cheek, while admirable in many ways, could also discourage individual striving and that pursuit of greatness he associated with master morality.
Okay, so Nietzsche might not have been a fan of, like, Sunday school.
Let's just say he had some strong opinions about how certain interpretations of Christianity might prioritize the needs of the many over the aspirations of the few.
So is he basically saying that Christianity killed ambition and turned everyone into, like, mindless followers?
He wouldn't have put it that way. But his fear was that a culture steeped in slave morality could create a society where people are afraid to stand out, to embrace their full potential. He called it the slave revolt in morals. This idea that the values of the weak and resentful had come to dominate Western civilization.
The slave revolt in morals. Kind of catchy, not gonna lie. But I can see how that idea could freak some people out, right? Especially back then.
Totally. And it's a debate that continues to this day. How do we balance the needs of the individual with the needs of society? How do we create a culture that encourages both compassion and ambition without one stifling the other?
It's a tough one, for sure. And it's not like Nietzsche gives us all the answers, but that's what I appreciate about his work. He's forcing us to have these conversations, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Precisely. He's like that friend who asks the really tough questions at a party, the ones that make everyone stop and think.
The friend who, like, accidentally sparks an existential crisis at your birthday bash?
Maybe. But sometimes those are the most important conversations to have.
True, that. So if we're living in this world where the old values are crumbling, where God is dead, and those traditional sources of meaning are gone, what are we supposed to do? I mean, Nietzsche wasn't advocating for a world of chaos and, like, every man for himself, right?
Not at all. In fact, that kind of nihilistic despair was exactly what Nietzsche feared most. He was desperately searching for a way to find meaning in a world seemingly stripped of it. And speaking of heavy concepts, remember that other Nietzschean brain bender we touched on? Eternal recurrence.
Oh, yeah, that one. The idea that our lives might just play on repeat, like a cosmic broken record forever and ever. Yeah. Can't say I'm a huge fan of that thought.
It's definitely a lot to process. But remember, Nietzsche wasn't necessarily saying we should take this literally. It's more like a thought experiment he's proposing. Imagine having to relive every joy, every sorrow, every single moment over and over again for eternity. The question is, could you face that prospect and say why yes to it all?
Wow, okay, I see what you mean. It's less about a literal replay of our lives and more about, I don't know, a way of thinking about how we're living right now, right? Like, am I making choices I'd be cool with repeating for all of eternity?
Bingo. Eternal recurrence is about embracing life so fully, squeezing every drop of meaning out of every moment, that even the thought of an infinite loop wouldn't fill you with dread. It becomes a celebration.
Wow, okay. I'm not sure if I'm quite at that level of enlightenment yet, but I get it. So if we're tying this all back to the beginning, to Nietzsche's whole God is dead proclamation, he wasn't just trying to freak everyone out, was he?
Not at all. Remember, he was deeply concerned about the potential for nihilism and despair. He wasn't offering a step-by-step guide for what to do next, but more like a wake-up call, a challenge.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, the old answers might not work anymore, so what are you going to do about it?
He's like the ultimate philosophical coach, pushing us to find our own strength, define our own values, create our own meaning in a world where the old roadmaps have, well, kind of gone up in flames.
And that's what makes his work so relevant, even today. We might not be living in the late 1800s anymore, but we're still grappling with these fundamental questions about meaning and purpose. If anything, those questions feel even more urgent in today's world.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Nietzsche, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. God is dead isn't a declaration of victory for atheism. It's an invitation. It's a call to step up and become the creators of our own lives, our own values, our own sense of meaning. And honestly, that's both incredibly daunting and incredibly exciting. What do you think?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, there you have it, folks. Whether you think he was a genius or a bit of a madman, Nietzsche definitely left us with a lot to chew on. So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll even find your inner Ubermensch along the way.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Welcome to History. Welcome To is dedicated to exploring new technology to create informative and entertaining media. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more. Leave a comment if you have an idea for an episode that we should start researching. Thank you for listening.